Pacifica, a comprehensive analysis of its natural rights foundation, welfare paradox, and fiscal architecture. Introduction: the singular constitutional experiment. Pacifica is not merely another proposed constitution. It is a radical, internally coherent, and philosophically audacious attempt to reconcile four traditionally contradictory political impulses: absolute natural rights libertarianism, comprehensive social democratic welfare, aggressive ecological stewardship, and the complete abolition of general taxation. It achieves this not through vagueness or contradiction, but through a relentless application of the Lockean harm principle and a redefinition of what constitutes legitimate economic coercion. The document presents a rights radical republic where the individual is sovereign, government is a fiduciary trust, and the public purse is filled not by the plunder of labor but by the profits of public enterprise and penalties exacted upon greed, waste, and aggression. To understand Pacifica is to wrestle with its central paradox: how can a state that abolishes taxation provide universal healthcare, housing, education, and a basic income, while remaining faithful to the non-aggression principle? Part 1: The philosophical bedrock, natural rights and natural justice. Pacifica's entire legal order is built upon a foundation that is unambiguously classical liberal and neo-Lockean, but extended beyond mere rhetoric into binding, self-executing judicial doctrine. 1. Rights as pre-political and inviolable. The Constitution declares that all persons are endowed by the universe with free will, and possess universal, fundamental, inherent, unalienable, absolute, and self-regulating natural rights. These rights, to life, liberty, property, self-defense, privacy, and the pursuit of happiness, do not originate from any state, sovereign, or social contract. They exist in the state of nature. Consequently, the government does not grant rights, it merely recognizes and secures them. This is the foundational axiom from which all else flows. 2. The supremacy of natural law over positive law. The Constitution operationalizes the principle that unjust laws avoid ab initio. A law repugnant to natural human rights is no law at all, but an edict opposed to the precept of the just authority. The judiciary is explicitly empowered to strike down any statute that violates natural justice, and the people retain the right of nullification and jury veto. Crucially, the burden of proof always rests on the accuser or the state, never on the individual. If there is doubt regarding a governmental power, the presumption is that the government lacks it. 3. The non-aggression principle as the sole limitation. Force, theft, or fraud against a non-aggressor is the only legitimate trigger for legal intervention. No individual has the right to initiate force against any other individual. This is why Pacifica abolishes victimless crimes and requires a corpus delicti, an actual injured party, for any prosecution. This radical adherence to the NAP shapes everything from drug legalization to self-defense laws. Part 2: The welfare paradox, liberty enabled, not negated. As correctly noted, Pacifica is not a night watchman state. It mandates extensive public welfare, universal single-payer healthcare, free public education, robust homelessness services, 24/7 shelters with amenities, long-term camping areas, rent-to-own housing, universal basic income, dividends, a national homesteading program, and even a safe haven transit network. How does this square with natural rights? The Constitution provides a sophisticated answer. 1. Welfare as a prerequisite for sovereignty. The preamble explicitly charges the government with securing the people's Maslowian needs by the achievement of post-scarcity. The implicit logic is profound: a starving, sick, or unhoused person is not truly sovereign. They are vulnerable to coercion, easily manipulated by employers, landlords, or state actors, and practically incapable of exercising their negative rights, e.g., resisting an unlawful arrest, participating meaningfully in referenda, or defending their property. Thus, providing a material floor is not an act of paternalism, it is a precondition for actual liberty. It is the state's fiduciary duty to ensure that every citizen possesses the capacity for self-governance. 2. Privileges, not rights, the safeguard against tyranny. The Constitution is meticulously clear on this point: state schools, state healthcare, state welfare, are not rights, they are privileges established through the will of the people. This semantic distinction is critical. Because they are privileges, they are voluntary and revocable. no one can be forced to participate. You cannot be compelled to accept a vaccine, treatment, or welfare check. Decentralized, administered at the state and local level, subsidiarity ensuring responsiveness to local needs rather than monolithic federal control. Sunset-ridden, all programs expire periodically and must be re-ratified by the people. Designed for exit, the programs actively push towards self-sufficiency via homesteading, public works jobs, and property ownership, rather than trapping individuals' independency. Part 3. The fiscal architecture, taxation abolished, exactions instituted. Here lies the most audacious and ingenious aspect of Pacifica, the explicit abolition of taxation in general as legalized plunder, juxtaposed against a dense network of mandatory economic impositions. To answer the core question, yes, Pacifica has taxes, but they are categorically redefined and strictly limited. 1. The prohibited class, general, UN earmarked coercion. Pacifica utterly bans any tax on personal income, labor, or general private consumption that goes into a general/fund. The government cannot demand a percentage of a citizen's wages simply to operate. This is the absolute prohibition. 2. The permitted class, penalties, fees, and earmarked exactions. To fund its welfare programs, Pacifica relies on a forensic catalogue of mandatory exactions that are justified either as restitution for harm, user fees for specific services, or state-to-state contributions. Category A. Direct wealth and income exactions. The greed penalty wealth income tax, a progressive levy of up to 80% on wealth and income exceeding 108 times the national mean income. Justified as a penalty for violating the Lockean proviso, taking more than you can use, leaving not enough and as good for others. Foreign labor displacement tax, a 25–35% tax on income earned by non-citizens working for Pacifican entities. Justified as restitution for displacing citizens from the workforce. Category B. Property and land exactions. Vacancy tax, property tax, a 1–5% annual levy on unoccupied or underutilized real estate. Justified as a deterrent against speculative waste and earmarked specifically for affordable housing. Land hoarding penalty, a recurring 3.6–12.5% tax on parcels exceeding reasonable use. Justified as a penalty for wasteful enclosure of the commons. Category C. Corporate and commerce exactions. Business tax, corporate income tax, up to 33.3% of total profits, with massive discounts for cooperatives, family businesses, and local enterprises. Automation impact charge, up to 40% of net gains from replacing human labor with machinery. Earmarked for worker retraining and transition funds. Category D. Environmental Pigouvian exactions. Petrochemical ecological contribution, 35% of net value from fossil fuel extraction. Earmarked for environmental restoration. Carbon monoxide harm tax, a direct tax on vehicular and industrial CO emissions. Framed explicitly as a harm tax. Category E. Regulatory fees and fines. Immigration entry fees, caps on charges for entering the country. Plastic registration fees, recurring annual fees on single-use plastic manufacturers. Food waste fines, up to 200% of market value for discarding edible food. Postal and toll rates, mandatory charges for government services, postage, commercial road use. Category F. State-to-state fiscal transfers. State membership fee, an 8.33% mandatory contribution from each state's budget to the federal government. 3. The defining distinction. The genius, and the potential sleight of hand, is that Pacifica claims this is not taxation because 1. Specific earmarking, every dollar collected is legally locked to a specific, constitutionally mandated purpose: housing, restoration, worker benefits. There is no general revenue fund. 2. Harm-based justification, most charges are framed as penalties for aggression or waste, greed, pollution, vacancy, displacement, not as a claim on legitimate labor. 3. Citizen ratification, legislatures cannot arbitrarily raise these rates, most require direct citizen referendum. In essence, Pacifica has swapped a general income tax for a dizzying array of Pigouvian taxes, wealth taxes, and user fees, all wrapped in the rhetorical armor of natural rights restitution. Part 4. The Grievances Addressed, a Blueprint for Reaction. Pacifica reads as a direct, surgical response to every major failure of 21st-century governance in the West. It is a constitutional indictment of the status quo. A. American specific grievances. 1. Corruption and lobbying, bans corporate contributions, forces legislators to write their own bills, mandates 10-year tax returns for candidates, and empowers citizen recall. 2. Police abuse, abolishes qualified immunity, mandates 1440p body cameras, bans chokeholds, demilitarizes police, and enshrines the right to resist unlawful arrest with lethal force. 3. Surveillance state, bans mass surveillance, facial recognition, social credit systems, client-side scanning, and mandates that all encryption is inviolable. 4. Endless war, enacts a strike-second doctrine, requires a supermajority in a popular referendum for war, and bans standing armies in peacetime. 5. Economic inequality, enforces strict wealth caps, limits executive pay to 16.6x the average worker, and taxes automation. B. Global specific grievances. 1. Digital authoritarianism, citizens retain the absolute right to live, UN connected, from smart cities, to use physical currency, and to decline digital IDs. 2. Pharmaceutical tyranny, manufacturers bear full liability for vaccine injuries, no mandates, no forced medical treatment, right to try experimental therapies. 3. Food sovereignty, protects farmers' rights to save seeds, labels GMOs, permits raw milk sales, and enshrines the right to self-sufficiency. 4. Corporate neocolonialism, bans slave labor in supply chains, denies corporate personhood, and imposes harsh exactions on foreign extractive industries. 5. Loss of sovereignty, bans incorporation into supranational bodies, voids foreign laws that contradict Pacifican rights, and prohibits foreign aid and foreign military bases. Part 5. The final verdict, coherence, contradiction, and viability. 1. Internal coherence. Pacifica is remarkably coherent on its own terms. It does not contradict itself, it simply rejects the standard definitions of rights, taxes, and welfare. If one accepts the axiom that property is only legitimate if it leaves enough and as good, for others Lockean proviso, then wealth caps and land penalties are restitution, not theft. Government exists solely to secure natural rights, then providing a material floor is enabling liberty, not undermining it. Coercion is only justified as a response to aggression or harm, then Pigouvian pollution taxes and automation charges are corrective justice, not plunder. The system holds together because it applies the non-aggression principle to capital, corporations, and property itself, not just to individuals. This is a radical, neo-distributist reinterpretation of libertarianism. 2. The lingering contradictions, the friction points. Despite its coherence, several practical and ethical friction points remain. The bureaucratic paradox: the Department of Goods and Services is meant to be a nimble, citizen-owned co-op, but running a comprehensive welfare state, healthcare, education, housing, AI governance requires immense administrative capacity. The risk of bureaucratic capture and inefficiency is high, even with sunset clauses. Wealth evasion: the 80% greed penalty creates a massive incentive for capital flight, tax avoidance, and offshoring. The Constitution relies on self-reporting and audits, which may be insufficient against sophisticated financial engineering. Enforcement of the harm principle, determining what constitutes wasteful land hoarding or excessive greed, invites endless judicial and legislative interpretation, potentially undermining the very bright line rules the Constitution tries to establish. The voluntary consent charade: while welfare is theoretically voluntary, the state is the sole provider of emergency shelter, healthcare, and basic income for the destitute. There is no meaningful alternative for a dying, homeless person. Is consent truly free in such a context, or is it coercion by circumstance? 3. The overarching verdict. Pacifica is not a libertarian text. It is a distributist, eco-socialist, anti-oligarchic republic that has appropriated the language of natural rights to justify a comprehensive, market socialist welfare state funded by penalties on extreme wealth and environmental damage. It tackles the grievances of the modern populace head-on: the surveillance state, the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical cartels, the erosion of free speech, the brutality of police, the corruption of money in politics, the theft of data, and the destruction of the environment. Its ultimate premise is that true freedom requires material security, and that capital must be restrained just as much as the state. It rejects both the neoliberal consensus and the authoritarian left. Whether it is practically implementable is an empirical question, but as a constitutional blueprint, it is perhaps the most comprehensive, thoughtful, and fiercely consistent attempt to build a post-scarcity, post-corruption, rights-radical republic ever drafted. Pacifica asks us to imagine a world where the state is a profitable cooperative enterprise, where the wealthy pay for their excess, where polluters finance restoration, and where every sovereign person is armed, housed, fed, and free, not despite the government, but because the government is finally confined to its proper fiduciary role. It is a radical vision, but it is not an incoherent one.